liftoff in T-minus 30.
Stand by for further instructions, Minnesota Black Robe Regiment.
Secondary guidance systems engaged.
Minnesota Black Robe Regiment, it will be on my mark.
All systems are a go. All systems are a go.
Minnesota Black Robe Regiment, you are over the target. You are authorized to fire at will.
Hey, thanks for stopping by. It's TC and Friends Monday Night Musings, Season 2, Episode 22. And you guys are in for a treat. I got Disgruntled Minnesota Teacher on here for you tonight. We're going to get some of the housekeeping things out of the way. If you haven't yet, please like, subscribe, and share. Definitely subscribe to the channel. And if you are a regular viewer, if you are a regular fan and you enjoy the content, you want to see me being able to keep putting it out, you want to give me a hand with that, I do have a Subscribe Star page that you'll be able to see scroll across the bottom there. You can head over to Subscribe Star, Minnesota Black Robe Regiment Podcast, and throw this old man some support. Next month, I turned 53, and I never thought I would be in a position where I was going to be doing. The idea of podcasting for me is still foreign, and I've been doing it for over 3 years. But Subscribestar helps contribute to the cause, if you will. Keeps the internet on here in TC's household. So head over to Subscribestar. If you have questions for the guests tonight, whether you're from Minnesota or as my friend and associate Dana from Florida is watching, if you have questions, and if we get a few people watching and we get a lot of comments going on and you want to ask a question, I'm going to try and get to them. I'm not shilling. Just sometimes the best way for me to see it is even a $1 super chat or something like that, because that actually sends up an alert saying, hey, you have a super chat, because they want me to recognize it when that happens. So there's that. And there again, comment, go back afterwards, comment, and share it after it's been streamed. That helps everything in the algorithm. I do believe you guys are in for a treat. Remember, for some of you, school has already started. Minnesota does not start until after Labor Day. So if I remember correctly, everything starts on Tuesday of next week. We tend to not have to worry about things like hurricanes, like Dana does down there in Florida, screwing up the school week and keeping the kids at home. So we don't have to start quite as early as other places. And it takes quite a bit as far as snow for us to keep the kids home from school. Like quite a bit. Well, it used to. Now if it looks like that might sneeze snow in our directions, we tend to shut things down, because, well, we've bred and raised an entire generation of weaklings here in the state of Minnesota. There's the old saying is, hard times build hard men build good times build soft men build hard times. Well, Minnesota had it hard for a long time. We built hard men, we built some good times, and we built some soft times. And for some strange reason, it feels like we're not moving past the soft times here in Minnesota yet. So we have raised entire generations of weaklings. Not going to argue about it. You don't have to like it. It's just true. So without any further ado, I'm going to bring Teach in. Now you guys are going to notice that he is not going to be on camera, but you should have his audio. Teach, can you hear me? Are you there?
Yep, I got you. Can you hear me now?
Yeah, I'm going to, just so people don't have to. All right, give us a 1-2.
1, 2.
Yep. If anybody in chat wants to make sure that you guys can hear him, give me a thumbs up or a yes, you can hear him loud and clear. Teach, tell us a little bit about yourself, because I know the description of the video or for the stream, you've been teaching for over 15 years and coaching. But give us a little bit about your background, how you ended up in teaching, and what it's been like just on the kind of the surface, the ancillary aspects of that going
Yeah. So it'd be pretty safe to say I've been involved in education in some way, shape, or form my entire life. My father was an educator, ended up being an administrator. He was a principal and superintendent of schools. My mother worked in the school system. I married a teacher she's an elementary teacher, but in the classroom for nearly 20 years now. And then, like I said myself, I've been around education the whole time in the classroom with coaching. Prior to that, I worked a lot in sales and finance. I was in the business world. And that's kind of honestly what led me to wanting to get into the classroom. Obviously I was around the kids with coaching, but I coached prior to getting into the classroom. But being around the kids and being in the business world, and I'm using air quotes here when I say out in the real world, started to get to kind of see the disconnect that was coming from what we would see when kids would leave the high school setting and enter the workforce or move on to college, and startled me a little bit. And I was at the point where I wasn't satisfied with what I was doing in the finance world, and I just wanted a change, and I wanted to do something that I saw as a little bit more beneficial for society overall. And coming from a family of educators, it made sense. It was something that it was always in the back of my head, but honestly, I never thought that I'd be capable to do it because I didn't think I was the type of person that should be in the classroom. But took the leap, went back to school, and it's been a little bit of a roller coaster since there. I've taught everything from special ed to business classes, and business and social studies is kind of my niche where I'm at. But like I said, I'm still doing that now. I'm in some smaller schools in southern Minnesota, and then, like I said, I coach as well. So a lot like our wonderful governor, teacher and football coach, right? So I am qualified for political
Wow,
office if anybody wants.
You just ruined the entire stream.
Sorry if everybody left the chat after that. I had to throw that one in there. So
wow.
Yep.
The views and opinions of the
Mhm.
guests of this show do not necessarily reflect sanity or intellect. So
It's been a long day. I just got home from practice, so my brain's fried already.
So you came into it kind of as a second career,
Mhm.
and you were properly motivated in the sense of you wanted to make a difference. The way you would hope every public servant enters into a career field, you would hope that they would want to be doing it for something other than just, financial gain or remuneration. You said, look, I want to go and have an impact. I want to make a difference in these kids' lives. And, let's be honest, 16, 17, 18, they're still kids, compared to, especially old timers like me. But you really went in, kind of full force, both feet in the water, jumped right in after having experience, having, family that's been in education or been educators for a long time. I watch your content and I see somebody that has a, I wouldn't necessarily say radical perspective, radical maybe compared to a lot of other educators in the state of Minnesota and maybe across the US, but you have a pretty standard, normal, traditional perspective on things. Have you always been that way? Is that something that
Yeah,
developed it through life? Were you raised that way?
I was raised. My father's from the East Coast. He's a New York guy, so I was raised a lot different than I would say the kids I grew up in when we moved to Minnesota. Right when I was born in Minnesota, but he's from the East Coast, so just a little bit different viewpoint on how everything operated. So I think that helped kind of formulate my ideas on things. I don't put much of it as far as and I hate to even bring this up now, but it's a big part of what's going on in education right now, the political aspect of things. I don't even really consider myself affiliated with a political party one way or the other. I just kind of consider myself a common sense person that, especially when it comes to education, I have seen that there are some areas that are lacking and that there are proven better ways out there to do it. And it frustrates me sometimes that we can't see those things as educators, or education doesn't want to see those. So my viewpoints come from more of okay, well, in the business world, if something isn't working, you don't throw more money at it and continue to do the same thing and hope to see change. Sometimes you have to look in the mirror and you have to make drastic changes. And so I think that's where some of my viewpoints with education come from is, okay, there's some things happening that we definitely understand are not benefiting kids, right? Our students are not seeing growth that we want to have, we want to see. So why do we continue to beat our heads against the wall and just ask for more money? When are we going to actually, enact some change that is going to show some student success? And yeah, we could get into the history of the Department of Education and the history of, you know, you know, uh, politics and government getting involved in schools and what that's done for them. And I'm sure we probably will a little bit, but overall, I just, I hope people take from my comments is I just want to see something better for our kids. That's really what it comes down to. I'm sick of seeing kids not being able to read. I'm a huge advocate for reform in areas of literacy and instructional practices there. That's something that we have to fix. I'm not a fan of social emotional learning and restorative practices. We need to bring behavior and we need to bring order back into our schools so that not just our staff feel safe, but our students feel safe. And the students that want to be in school feel safe that they're there. So I guess I suppose it does appear a bit more traditional. But when you really start to look at hard numbers, traditional wasn't even that beneficial to our students. If we look back as far as 100 years ago, we've been making a lot of mistakes in education, and we've
Well,
kind of been on a downward spiral.
you bring something up. You say going back 100 years ago that education really started its downward spiral. I'm paraphrasing what you said,
Mhm.
obviously. Um, what would you say to the assertion? Because it's my assertion, and I express this to a lot of people, that I believe that what I refer to as government or state schools. I don't like
Mhm.
the term public school. Government or state schools have always been at the core, their entire design by, philosophically, when you go back to John Dewey, who is kind of considered to be the modern father or the father of modern education.
Mhm.
He stated very clearly that his entire goal was to disenfranchise parents from influence over their children and to turn children into, and again I'm paraphrasing the longer statements and multiple statements, um, to turn children into automatons of the state and
Mhm.
remove the influence of not only the parents but of faith traditions from the children. And Dewey was an avowed social Marxist, and his system was readily embraced by teachers as far back as the early 1900s and late 1800s. Do you would you say that there was a time where what we know as modern public schools were far different? I mean, without the obvious, yeah, teachers used to be able to spank you and things like that.
Right.
But or do you think it's just that they've come so far and definitely come so far so fast in the last few years that people are just now kind of awakened to the idea that maybe this isn't the great thing that we've always thought it was?
Right. Yeah. I think COVID obviously opened some eyes, right? When you brought the classroom into the living room, parents got to hear things, they got to see things, and a lot of people started asking questions. But it goes back farther than that. And you can go all the way back to the formation of the Department of Education and look at, some of the, the wealthy individuals, the Rockefellers of the world that were involved in the creation of the Department of Ed. Prior to that, school was essentially looked at as we're going to get you literate. You're going to learn how to read. You're going to learn how to write. You're going to do how to do math. You're going to learn, religion was still heavily taught in schools. And we're going to get you to essentially an eighth grade level. And now we have to remember as well, an eighth grade reading level 130 years ago was probably the equivalent of what a college junior reads at now. So they were going to get you to a point of literacy, and then they were going to send you out and you were going to work on your parents' farm or your family's bakery or blacksmith shop or whatever it was. So when the Department of Education formed and we said, okay, no, we need to make this more structured and more factory like and more, you got rid of the individuality of students and really started to focus on turning them into a whole group, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I've actually been planning on doing a kind of a breakdown of the modern public schooling and its rise, tandem with industrialization, and how what we've seen in government run schools or state run schools is the training of children for factory production. Factories, when industrialization really kicked off and started to become kind of the hub of urban life, factories operated off of a time system of you start your day when the bell or the whistle blows, you take your break when the bell or the whistle goes, you take your lunch, then you move to your next assignment at that bell or the whistle. At the end of the day, another bell or whistle blows, and then you're done for the day and you go home, and then you start the process all over again. And we see that same process applied. I don't know about today. I haven't darkened the door of a government run school for a very long time, but I'm assuming they still do bells.
Right. Yep.
And and what we saw was that rising together where the children were conditioned, this is how you know when your day starts and when your day ends, and everything in between is filler. And I liked what you said about the 8th grade, get you to that 8th grade level. And then after that, if you want to continue, wonderful. But at least we have you literate and functioning. And then I'm not disparaging the totality of teachers. Obviously, if I was, I wouldn't be speaking with you. I know I have several teaching friends who share a lot of your perspective that I know will either be watching live or watching on playback. As I peruse your Twitter feed, X feed, I don't know. I feel weird telling people, hey, go over and watch X.
Right. Check out my X. Yeah.
Check out X. When, as I peruse your feed, I don't see there again anything that's, just like staggeringly, far right. But you definitely have some, positions that people would, in your profession would definitely consider to be dangerous. Like speaking about why do we feel the need to talk about sex so much in schools?
Correct. Right.
Has that been for you over the last, how many years, and you can give me kind of a time frame, has that been one of the more eye-opening aspects of what's been going on for you, or are there other things that really got your attention?
The biggest thing that got my attention, and me being in outstate Minnesota, I don't want to say
For those of you watching,
from,
when he says outstate Minnesota, he means rocks and cows.
Exactly. We are rocks and cows people. We are outside the 494 loop by at least a half-hour drive. So, so a lot of the things that we see taking place in the Minneapolis schools and St. Paul schools.
Oh, you're closer to the loop than I am.
No, so, well, we don't see a lot of those things creeping into the rocks and cow schools yet. Now, there are some of the bigger districts and some of the larger areas around where I'm at that you're starting to see that, and it's starting to become a bit of a concern, and parents are starting to take notice of it. The biggest issue that really drew me to even start speaking out about it is things in the education is the literacy crisis that we're facing in this country. If you were to ask me what the largest issue the public school system has on its hands right now, it would be the literacy crisis, because the literacy crisis spouts off into so many different pathways of bad things that happen for kids. You have an illiterate population. Number one, the workforce suffers right later on down the road. But then you take that even further back into the school system. You have a kid that can't read. Well, that's frustrating for a young person, and they don't know how to express those feelings of, I'm mad right now because I can't read this book, or you're going to ask me to read in front of a classmate, or whatever it may be. So what do? They lash out. Right. And then you get into the other problems of where we've gone with discipline in our schools and the taboo we have against suspensions now and things of that nature. But we have to solve the literacy crisis. That's probably one of the biggest things that I get DMs from other teachers on social media attacking me for is, how dare I question their practice, their instructional strategy in a classroom, and when it comes to literacy, you have, for all the non-teachers out there and for the teachers that might be listening, I'm going to give the most basic explanation of these two that I can, so forgive me. But you have balanced literacy and you have structured literacy, right? And structured literacy is essentially, science of reading is a term that you've probably heard if you've been on the internet in the last few years and followed anything with education. So the difference between the two, balanced literacy is what's used in a lot of schools. And it's essentially, especially in the high school, middle school ages, we're going to give a brief instruction on a topic or whatever we're talking about as far as, English language at that time. Then you're going to read something, either small group or you're going to read by yourself. And then we're going to discuss it afterwards. Okay. Well, if the foundation wasn't built properly from the time they were in elementary school, that middle high school kid, he can't read that, he can't participate in the discussion, and he's just frustrated because he has to sit there and stare at a wall for 45 minutes. Structured literacy really gets back to, and honestly, we've seen structured literacy before, like we talked about with the history going back 100 years. We've had this battle between balanced literacy and structured literacy, and another name, kind of whole word, is something that was thrown around back in the 20s when they made a big switch from phonic awareness. We can remember from maybe some of us that were 80s and 90s kids, hooked on phonics worked for me. That's essentially science of reading is what it is. So we have a bigger, the science of reading and structured literacy is more of a focus on why do these letters make this sound, all right, and what will they do for that word, right? It teaches kids how to dissect the word, and it's how the brain functions, and it's actually how the brain learns how to read. So those practices kind of got stripped out of the schools for a while, and like I said, we'll go back 100 years. Early 1900s, we were structured literacy. We were science of reading. We were phonic awareness. And then in the 1920s, mid 1920s, I think, somebody came in and said, nope, whole word is what we've got to go with. So we started teaching kids sight words. So we started teaching them to memorize things. They didn't learn phonic awareness and letter patterns and things like that. They just learned how to memorize words, right?
Yep.
And then in the 40s, a book came out and said, why Johnny can't read. And the whole nation read it and went, oh my gosh, we've been teaching our kids wrong. So we went back to structured literacy. And then now we've been bouncing back and forth. And, when we see the most advancement is when we're focusing on structured literacy, the science of reading. We know how the brain truly does work when it's trying to learn how to read. And structured literacy is the way to do it. Science of reading is the way to do it. And there's a big pushback on that. And to get back to how I started this, when I get the DMs from teachers, that's what they were taught balanced literacy, right? So I'm not attacking the teachers. I'm attacking a practice, right? I'm attacking a strategy. They're doing what they were taught to do in college in a prep program, right? Which that's another conversation we can get into. So they're doing what they were told was right. And you and I both know human beings, we don't like to be told we're wrong. So when you tell people what you are doing for these kids is wrong and it's not helping them, they take offense, and which is another reason why it's so hard for schools to make that shift back to the science of reading and structured literacy practices. Now, the state of Minnesota, and one thing I'm usually not happy with anything the state of Minnesota does, but they have started a program.
I just want everybody to stop for a second, and could you say that one more time?
I'm usually not happy with anything the state of Minnesota does.
We're going to just steep in that for a minute, class. We're just going we're going to meditate on that. I'm just not happy with pretty much anything the state of Minnesota does.
Right.
There we go. There's my NPR presentation. Just not happy with the state of Minnesota and what it does. Yes. Okay. Right. Go ahead. Teach.
Yeah. So, but what they have done now is they've started the program. They are starting to at least acknowledge that, okay, maybe we need to change something literacy wise. So this year they allowed teachers.
Dude, I love that there's like, maybe, okay, there could be a trifle bit of just a little bit of a problem. And we throw pretty much, and correct me if I'm wrong, but as per capita, we are one of the highest spending states when it comes to education.
Yeah, I think we're, oh my goodness, are we average in the state? I think we're around 13,000 per student.
Yeah, but I mean, we're easily in the top 10 per student as far as what we spend per capita. Per capita. Yeah. That doesn't mean
per capita, absolutely. Yeah.
Per capita, we're easily in the top 10, if not top 5.
Right. I think we've spent something it's just in the country, spent something like $2 trillion on education in just the last 30 years.
And the Center for the American Experiment recently released the statistics that show that in math and reading, we're in the bottom, like 10%.
Mm-hmm.
So just there again, what you're saying ties into all of this. Like we're just throwing money after money after money after money after money after money into everything other than actually improving the problem, because we've got excuses. And don't get me wrong, I don't think I want to, God bless Steve Drakowski. When he, I think you're probably going to know where I'm going with this.
Right. Yep.
When he said, "I've never met a hungry kid in my life." Like, okay, first of all, Steve, that's just stupid. If you could tell me you've never met a kid whose family doesn't feed him.
Right.
Not just your kids because they're, oh, Dad, I'm starving. Even when I was in school, I knew kids who didn't have a lot to eat
Right.
and they were hungry. But we are spending money on free lunch, free breakfast now, free breakfast and lunch in the schools for every child in the government education system. But our scores on testing, as far as competency, are bottom of the barrel.
Mm-hmm.
That to me is not a reflection on the quality in the qualifications or the passion and the desire of the teachers by and large. It says something about a failed system that sees throwing money after the problem as the only answer, and as long as you're spending money, everything's fine. And I
Right.
think every teacher that I personally know and would talk to would tell you it's not the issue of how much money we're spending, it's where we're spending it. Is that fair?
That's absolutely true, and I hope other teachers realize, maybe listening to me tonight, of I'm not I love teachers. I trust me. I am a teacher. I'm married to one. My father was one. For goodness sakes, I'm not attacking teachers. Now, there's some bad teachers out there that I'll absolutely attack, because there are some people, just like every profession, there are some people that should not be teachers. I'm sorry, they shouldn't be educators. They're not good at it. They're not in it for the right reasons, and so they shouldn't be doing this. I'm not attacking teachers. I'm attacking a system. And when we talk about the money, in the last, my goodness, since the 70s, we've seen, for inflation adjusted, if I have the number right, inflation adjusted spending is, it's been like a 375% increase in federal spending. And as far as test scores go, we've been stagnant. We've seen a massive increase in administration in schools, but we've seen no growth in teachers and students in schools. And the testing, as far, we can get back to that in a second, because the MCA testing in Minnesota is a joke and we need to get rid of it, but it is the only metric we have to measure right now. So yes, right now, the idea of let's throw money at what we're doing, we're continuing to throw money at it, and that's not the issue. Money has, if we want to say we want to fully fund schools, let's fully fund schools. Let's give us a blank check, but also every single employee at a school better understand we're going to be held to some ridiculously high standards, as we should. I mean, if we're going to continue to throw money at it, we'd better step up and make that, the return on investment's got to improve.
Well, let's just, everybody, who's a regular viewer of mine, knows that, one of my pet peeves, after having, been in the law enforcement world for almost 13 years and, having a brother who's been in for over 20, when you look at people who are public servants and they're living off, please teach, don't take this as a disparaging way, but when you're living off the backs of the taxpayers, there needs to be an expectation
Right.
that you're performing to a level of competency that's indicative of the pay that you make. And so
Right.
if you want to go teach in a school district that pays crap, then maybe it's not that it's true, but I guess maybe if that's the only job you can get, then maybe that's justification for doing a bad job.
Right.
And I don't really think it is, but it's the same thing with law enforcement. You're living off the backs of the taxpayers. Anybody in the public sector, you're living off the backs of the taxpayers. You really need to be highly, highly accountable for what it is that you're doing and for how you're performing. Because you wouldn't get away with poor performance in the private sector for real long before somebody said, shape up or ship out.
Yeah, that's
And
exactly right. I just had a Twitter, not an exchange, but I was trying to just a conversation. There's another teacher educator account, and they had posted something. The big discussion all the time is what teachers need to be paid more. And I agree. We do need to be paid more. We do need to be paid more. Starting salary for a teacher in some school districts is still under $40,000 a year for a first year teacher. We do need to be paid more, but like I said before, we need to perform better, right? If we're going to get paid more, we need to step our game up too. And it was another one of those kind of threads of, she said she was sick and tired of hearing that teachers shouldn't be worried about higher pay because you shouldn't be in it for the money, you should be in it for the kids. And she made the point of, my husband works in construction, and he guarantees me he's in it for just the paycheck for him. There's no reason, nothing wrong with just being in it for the money. And I replied to her and I just asked her simply, I said, I agree 100%. I teach for a paycheck as well. I got to pay my bills. But if your husband in construction builds a house that collapses 3 months after he builds it, is somebody else going to hire him to build a house? And I didn't get a response from that. You know, it's the private sector doesn't accept failure. Well, I mean, it's starting to, unfortunately, in a lot of areas. But
touche.
Right. So
they're encouraging it with DE.
Right.
I don't like to call it DEI. I like to refer to it as DIE, because that's what it does. It makes everything die. But you're right, though, that in the private sector, even private teachers, private school teachers, are held to a far higher standard by the entity where they're performing or teaching. Then, and there again, this is not an issue of me taking, individual teachers to task, but it is an issue of, there are things that public sector employees, teachers, cops, school administrators, city administrators, things like that, are able to get away with low performance that you would never get away with in a private sector, because a lot of times, especially in the schools, if you're towing a particular line, then you're actually, in the eyes of the administration or maybe even the school board, you're performing to a higher level. Whereas you might have you teach who's holding the students accountable, who's actually educating, but maybe you're not in there advocating for some of the more, whacked out stuff that's now being considered part of the education system, where they might look at you and go, well, you're not doing what we expect.
No, I am absolutely, I'm essentially blacklisted from one school district because I'm not afraid to speak up and say what we're doing isn't working, and again, it's tough for people to hear that. I mean, and maybe I'm not right, but I'm not going to sit back and watch kids continue to slide farther and farther back without saying something. Teachers and administrators right now, and part of me can't blame them. They're teaching, and the administrators are working in a manner to keep their jobs. And when you work just to keep your job and not do your job and improve at your job, that leads to poor results across the board, no matter what industry you're in. So, like I said, there's far too much.
And there again, wouldn't be tolerated in the private sector.
Exactly, which is another reason why I'm a huge proponent of school choice. Competition breeds excellence, and I'm sorry, if it takes school choice and it takes enough kids leaving the public school system for some schools to close the doors, for us to finally look ourselves in the mirror and say, okay, now we really do have to find a way to do better. Maybe that's what it takes. I don't know, but we definitely need some type of a change. And
let's actually touch on that school choice. This is going to come as a shock to a lot of people. And I don't know, you might know this, or maybe you don't. Historically, what a lot of people don't know is that up until the inception of what became known as common schools during the Lincolnian years, there was no such thing as a government-operated school.
Right.
There were community-operated schools, but they were still privately funded by the community, by the parents and the citizens within the community, which is why you could have a school meet in a church or in the town hall or wherever they might meet. And it was in, under the Lincolnian and in the lead up to the Lincolnian years where the common schools became the means by which children were drawn away from those more rural, more agrarian, more community-focused centers of education to more of a standardized form of teaching. And it was really kind of the push into public schools that was actually kind of pushed by Republicans, because they had a desire. And by the way, a lot of people are like, aren't you a conservative? I'm like, well, no. Not the way most people would see it. People had a desire, the Republicans, especially the radical Republicans, the vein of Lincoln, had a desire to take the influence of the church, the Roman Catholics especially, out of education, because they wanted children to be educated in a very particular way. And so Republicans actually pushed for barring students from being in private schools. They tried to make private schooling as impossible as possible for people, because they wanted children at that time to be as indoctrinated into a very centralist mentality.
Right.
And you look today, the people who are pushing for school choice are now, essentially not the mainline Republicans, but kind of more your traditionalist, more conservative, Christian minded Republicans who are pushing for that. And there aren't a lot of teachers who are for school choice,
No, unfortunately
because
not.
they see it as a threat, I think, to their stability. Would you say that's a fair
Yep. Yeah.
statement? Or
It's the generic argument that gets pushed out by Education Minnesota is, and that a lot of teachers unfortunately digest and regurgitate throughout the world, is, you're taking money, you're stealing money from public schools. And private schools, they're not held accountable like we are. Well, I'm here to tell you, public schools are not held accountable. Okay, there's public schools
well,
are not held
tell me what you
accountable.
mean. What's the difference between accountability in a private school versus accountability in a public school? Because I have my ideas of where the accountability comes in a private
Hmm.
school versus where
The,
it
account-
comes in a
the
public.
accountability in a private school is, if you're not doing your job and a parent doesn't think you're doing their job, they take their money somewhere else, and you're probably going to get fired as a teacher if you're not doing your job. In the public school, accountability is essentially, in my opinion, in a lot of cases, non-existent, because nobody wants to upset the apple cart. Nobody wants to go to battle with Education Minnesota, and administrators don't want to fight the union. I mean, short of punching a kid, I'm not sure what a teacher can even do anymore to be disciplined in a school, at least the ones that I've worked in. Um, so the accountability is almost non-existent once a teacher's reached tenure status, and they're it's very difficult to do anything to them, and administrators know that, so they just kind of let them hang on, and that's why we have so many teachers that, maybe have been doing this for a while, and they've lost the passion or whatever it may be. But what are they going to do about it? The system is set up to protect longevity instead of success in the classroom, for lack of a better words.
You do you see that? Do you see school choice as an issue of? I want to ask this. I don't want to be leading, but I don't want to be too broad either. One of the biggest pushbacks that we hear when it comes to school choice, I absolutely hate the argument of, oh, you're taking money out of this, the pockets of the public schools. And I'm like, well, you're taking money out of my pocket. Why is that okay? Um, when when you hear some of the biggest pushbacks, and Institute for Justice has a really good podcast that you might find interesting, just because they do touch on some of this in their first season. It's called Bound by Oath. And there's a story in there about Montana with a family, a single mom after divorce, who received scholarship, basically scholarship funding through a kind of a school choice type system in Montana, to take her kids, was able to take her kids out of the public school and send them to a private Christian school. And there was arguments that was violating the separation of church and state. And that's a lot of the pushback I hear from a lot of people who are in teaching positions in the state of Minnesota, is that not only are you taking money out of the public schools, too bad, so sad, but you're also violating, the Constitution. And are you hearing those arguments? Do you see it as a, potentially a valid argument, or do you think it's just the teachers unions, whether it be Education Minnesota or the NEA, or whoever the union reps might be, or where they're
Mm-hmm.
from? Do you see that as just a scare tactic to keep up rhetoric against the school choice movement?
It's marketing. I mean, it's marketing 101. You know, throw something at the wall and see what sticks. And they threw that at the wall, and that got enough people's attention, and got enough people to start talking about it. You know, when I talk to teachers about it, and I talk to colleagues about it, it's kind of like you said before. They're scared. Well, what does that do for me? Do I lose my job if enough kids go to private school? And I don't know. I can't tell them anymore. Well, all you're worried about is losing your job. Why don't you do something to keep your job? Do something and become so valuable that they can't get rid of you. Or guess what? Those private schools are going to need teachers too. So build yourself up to the point where you're, at the quality of an educator of what a private school would look for. I don't know. I guess let the free market do what it's done so many times and create us a better system for education. Now, I will say that private schools, yes, they do tend to, obviously not all the time, but they do tend to produce better results because kids are held to a bit different standard, and the families that can afford them right now are usually a little bit more involved and place an importance on education. So there's all of that to it. So there's a lot of different factors.
That actually brings up something that I think is don't you think a really good argument against people who are opposed to school choice because it takes money from the state centers of education or indoctrination or however you want to say it? Don't you think that that's actually a really good way to push back and say, oh, so you're okay with poorer families, oftentimes in almost every region, every district, poorer families very often, especially the closer you get to the tallest buildings in any state, are often minorities.
Mm-hmm.
So you're okay with minorities being in substandard performance schools, while wealthier families, often white, can afford to put their kids in higher performing schools. So you're okay with that. So you actually are for, not you obviously teach,
Right.
but you are personally for children being held in substandard performance schools while wealthy people can afford to pay for their own.
It's an absolute valid argument. And it's the same when you look at the politicians that are adamantly against school choice. How many of them have gone to private schools or sent their kids to private schools?
Well, didn't Randy Weingarten, and I know you and Randy have a very special relationship.
Oh yeah, we're really good friends.
Didn't Randy's kids go to private school or something like that?
I don't know
or
for sure.
Somebody that's really outspoken on her end of that. Some big advocates. I know Iowa had a big advocate against school choice.
Yeah, that was one of their legislators. Yep.
One of their legislators was out there railing against school choice, and everybody's like, yeah, but your kids went to a private school. And her response is, well, yeah, I could afford it.
Right. Yep. It's I don't know.
Bigoted much?
Yeah, exactly. I mean, it's the bigotry of low expectations.
Soft bigotry of low expectations.
There you go. That's the phrase I'm trying to say. It's the arguments are almost nonsensical to why we don't want to have school choice. We can go through the list of how many other government programs can you take in, like, what if we were to take WIC, right, and say, okay, you're only allowed to use WIC at Target because Target Corp made a deal with the Minnesota legislature. Okay, you think Hy-Vee's not going to get pissed off? Quick Trip's not going to be mad? Cub Foods isn't going to be mad? Why do we gatekeep the money for educators?
I think a better analogy is by the way, yes, you can have WIC, but you can only go to not Target, not Hy-Vee, not Walmart, not Piggly Wiggly. I know nobody up here knows what Piggly Wiggly is, but you can't go to any IGA. You have to go only to a grocery store set up, operated, and maintained by the Department of Grocery Stores of the state of Minnesota.
Right.
And only there. And you can only use your voucher. That money can only be used there. And you get one choice of cheese. You get one choice of milk. You get one choice of cereal. You get one choice of bread. Period. That's it.
Right.
That's actually what they're saying.
Yep.
Is that, yes, you can use that money only at an approved, not just Target, because to me, I I'd let them target and Hy-Vee and everybody else fight that battle out in the courts. But but that's really what they would say is, okay, yep, you can be on Wick or you can be on Snap or you can be on whatever, but you can only go to this place because we've set it up. And
Yep.
and then we can tell you whether or not it's a valid purchase. Um,
I would say again because we kind of got off there, which I like that we're
that's
doing
what
that.
the
It's fun.
show's all about. That's why it's called Monday Night Musings.
Right.
So,
But as far as I have to say, public or private schools as well, while they do from the metrics that we've set as a society for what we want our schools to be, private schools do perform better. I still don't think private schools have got it right either. We've got some fundamental questions we have to answer throughout education, and the biggest one is what do we expect from our schools? And if we are going to continue to use pointless tests like the MCAs to judge everything, well, then we need to change some things. And how like I said, we get
that's the second or third time that you brought up the MCAs. What's the What's the MCA?
So the MCA test is what kids in fourth grade, eighth grade. Well, that's where we get our literacy scores for like the fourth graders, eighth graders, and juniors and seniors in Minnesota, right? So the kids take essentially it's a kind of a math test that they take at the end of the year and a reading test that they take at the end of the year, and then they take science and a few grades as well. And
so it used to be like it's like what the Iowa Basic Skills used to be.
Exactly. The problem with the MCA test that we use in Minnesota is it's the way it's structured. It's not beneficial at all to the educators. I don't know if I've ever met a teacher that likes the MCAs. Essentially you spend an entire year teaching to the Minnesota standards, and then at the end of the year, the kids take the MCAs, and that determines, whether or not they've met state decided literacy levels and levels of proficiency in math and reading and science.
It's outcome-based education.
Exactly. It's outcome based. And then the problem with that is, the reason that we're supposed to use assessments as educators is to find weak spots or find areas of that kids need a little bit of extra work in, or something that the whole class maybe didn't pick up on. And the MCAs don't really allow us to do that. You'll see a kid take it in, third grade, and they'll be non-proficient in math or in reading or math. And you'll see the area that they're least proficient in. Well, that third grade teacher, they're sending that kid off to summer, and they're going to fourth grade next year. And the fourth grade teacher has to teach them fourth grade standards and get them ready for the fourth grade MCAs. So they never get a chance to spiral back and say, okay, this is where this student struggled. We've got to build the foundation. So we build every year off of a foundation that was already crumbling because we didn't have an opportunity to go back and fix it. So by the time they get to middle school, high school, I have a friend she's a high school English teacher, and she's just lambasted by parents because, their kids struggle when they get to high school and when they get to college with paper writing and things like that. And, she takes it hard on herself, but I try to get her to understand as often as I can that, if a kid gets to you in 11th grade and can't properly write a sentence, that's not on you. There's an issue down the back in time somewhere that we have to fix. And that's something that the MCAs kind of gets in the way of. And like I said, I know I talk about literacy proficiency ratings a lot because it is the only metric we have to measure success in the classroom right now. But that's something that we need to get rid of. And, honestly, like I said, even with the private schools, we do school wrong. That's just flat out simple. We do school wrong.
Well, private schools more often than not are nothing more than the same exact system as state-run schools, only with maybe some things added in for curriculum that the parents want, which isn't
higher
necessarily
standards.
Yeah, and higher standards, and teachers are at will as opposed to by contract or by union, and
right,
and quite frankly, a private school isn't obligated to hire somebody with a 4-year teaching degree from the University of Minnesota.
Right, and in Minnesota, private schools are required to hold a certain percentage of Minnesota licensed teachers,
right?
But they don't have to be content specific. Say, like my license is in business and social studies. I could go and teach, English language arts at a private school, but I would count for a licensed teacher.
Right, and that's a person without a degree like that could walk in and say, "Hey, look, I have knowledge in history. I have a knowledge in philosophy," and be able to demonstrate that and teach, and And I'm not there again. I'm not disparaging teachers. Obviously, there's
Mhm.
certain things, teaching theory and educational theory and whatnot that are beneficial to some degree. Whether when you look at Charlotte Mason or something like that, it, those things are incredibly important. But private schools have some leeway in
Mhm.
bringing in a subject matter expert that they don't to teach a certain set of curriculi
Right.
that a government school could never do, even if the
Right.
person's far better educated on the topic
Right. When
than the person
the
actually
example I
teaching.
use a lot, for that topic is, and this is obviously basic, and there's tier one through tier four teachers in Minnesota. Tier one teacher a lot of times is what's called a community expert, not somebody who has a teaching license, did not go to a teacher prep college.
Mm-hmm.
But the way the licensure system in Minnesota works is, if Warren Buffett were to walk into a school and say, I want to teach an investing class, the school would have to say, you know what, we've got this kid who just graduated from Winona State last year with a degree in teaching business. They're more qualified, according to the state of Minnesota, than you, Mr. Buffett.
So you're going to be
And
a tier
that's,
one.
well, he wouldn't even be a tier one, because if they had a licensed applicant, if they couldn't really find a reason not to hire them, they're
It would
almost
be,
forced by law to hire that
yeah,
tier four teacher that has a teaching license, instead
right.
of somebody that's proven for 50 years to be one of the greatest investors to ever live. So that's an issue that, that's another issue. And like I said, there's a lot of issues we got to solve in education, but our licensure system absolutely needs to change. It definitely
So
does.
how how do you think? I mean, I already know how like NEA and Education Minnesota feels about homeschooling, home education. Um, there has definitely been an uptick in home education in the state of Minnesota, especially
Massive
since
uptick. Yep.
2020, where parents are like, well, I'm already doing it and I don't like what's happening in my local school district, so we're going to do this. There's been some push in Minnesota to actually change the law saying home educating families are going to be subject to inspection by the principals or the superintendent, by social workers, on
Mhm.
with less than 24 hours of notice. You have to present your curriculum to be approved, and on and on and on. And now that fortunately didn't happen. Do you see that being a continued push with the education lobby in Minnesota? Do you really? Because I get the sense that they're working to dismantle or disrupt or absolutely dissolve the home education network in Minnesota. Do you see it
Yeah.
the same way?
Yeah, homeschooling hits schools and it hits education Minnesota where it doesn't like to be hit, and that's the pocketbook. You take money away from public schools, and you take money away from education Minnesota. They don't like that, and they're going to push against that. And they like I said, they're education Minnesota is great at marketing. They really, really are. They make you think that no one is qualified to teach your child other than someone that has gone through a Minnesota teaching college. It's getting hard for teachers from other states to come to Minnesota because our licensure system is the way it is. So, as far as that goes, I mean, stay out of my house. Like, if these are my kids, you're going to come to my house. It's not up to you. Once I pull them
It,
out of those schools, my goodness, you
just so
stay.
people know, I'm not using hyperbole. That Teach will back me up on this. That was proposed
It
in
was
Minnesota.
absolutely proposed. Yep, and,
Absolutely
and
proposed.
it won't be the last time, and it'll get repackaged in a different way, which is another reason why. And anybody listening that follows me on Twitter knows how much I love Education Minnesota.
Yeah,
Um,
it's true, folks.
it's
He is out there. I mean, he's telling people, vote whatever way they tell you to vote. You got to
Yep, I
support
am.
him. He is absolutely. I
I'm
mean,
door knocking every day for
I
him.
really was hoping we'd argue about it. He's so sold out. He's
Right, right. So we have to, Education Minnesota has to get its dollars out of politics. I mean, it's just, yeah, it's they have far too much influence. They have far too many politicians in their pockets. They're doing a wonderful job of grooming teachers to become politicians and run for political office. And I hope people understand that that's pushing a lot of these same ideologies that we're seeing in some classrooms that people are getting upset about. It's pushing them right into politics. And Education Minnesota is not a teachers union. And when I talk about teachers union, any teacher that listens to this, I'm not talking about your local. You need your local right now, because it is sometimes the only protection we have from some craziness that some teachers we do face and have to protect ourselves from. I'm not talking about your local. When I talk Education Minnesota, I'm talking Denise Specht. I'm talking the communications directors and the lawyers that they have on staff to destroy any dissenting opinions to what Education Minnesota
I mean, they're
claims our kids
they're
need.
sending reps to school board meetings to monitor parents.
Yep.
It,
Yes.
it,
The
it,
NEA was helping call parents terrorists. I mean,
yeah.
it's pretty obvious what they're trying to do.
To throw it out there, because I know what I already know what your response will be. But all those homeschool kids are weird. They don't get socialized properly. And I'm like, have you looked at any of the public school kids lately? I mean, just
step foot in a public school and tell me a homeschool kid is weird.
Yeah, right. They don't know how to interact. I'm like, you mean they say yes, please, yes, no, please, thank you, yes, ma'am,
and I
no,
was
ma'am.
just going to say
yes,
that, over the years, I've had several homeschool kids play football for me. And that's the biggest thing. When I turn around at the end of practice and I say, okay, freshmen, clean the field up. The ones that are always doing it, my homeschool kids, they're the yes, sir, no, sir. Yes, coach. Thank you, coach. I appreciate that, coach. They're some of the hardest workers I have. They're some of the most coachable kids that I've ever had. And yes, by today's modern standards, they are weird because, like you said, they're not afraid to look at you and say, yes, sir, no, sir. Now, there's some, again, just like everything, there's some parents who probably shouldn't homeschool their kids because they're not qualified themselves and they take advantage of some of the things that are out there. But the vast majority end up,
right. But you know what's funny though is you will only hear this family home educated their children for 15 years and kept them locked in cages because, or they used homeschooling as an education as an excuse to abuse their children. And I'm like, there are a lot of kids abused in public schools too.
Absolutely,
a lot.
There absolutely
and
are,
not just by fellow students.
No, absolutely. There's stories every day that we don't see on the mainstream news, but it's like everything, we're going to see what they want us to see. So
I don't want anybody to hear me. I don't want anybody to hear me saying that every teacher is like that. But I mean, I broke a story here somewhat regionally and covered it of a teacher's aide in a local school district to us. I can't remember off the top of my head. I think it was up by not Cannon Falls, maybe Zumbrota or something like that. No offense to anybody in Zumbrota if it's not your school district, where she, punched a kid in the head because he wasn't listening to her. A para did. And I'm now covering a story from, I think she's in Stearns County, of a mother whose nonverbal autistic child has been greatly abused by a para, again, in this state-operated school, and has had no recourse. She's been able to get nowhere. And so when the argument is well, if kids are in private school or they're home educated, who's going to watch out for them? Who's going to protect them? I'm like, hello? Children who are going to be abused are going to be abused. Doesn't make it okay. But trying to say that you have to keep them in the public school is going to protect them from all this abuse is absolutely hogwash. It is absolute hogwash. You brought up politics and people being kind of pushed. Obviously, Education Minnesota and NEA really do push people to get involved, to run for office, to be part of the political system, which I think is great. I believe in think local, act local.
Right.
But you brought up the point that people are being pushed, and that's why I think you're starting to see more and more people show up to school board meetings and running for school board and, really starting to take notice. How much, as a teacher in your school district, how much parental involvement do you see at school board meetings? Are parents, did they start to show up during 2020 and during all the masking and all of that stuff? Did they start to show up and voice their frustrations? Were they starting to ask questions about critical race theory and critical gender theory and all that stuff? And maybe it didn't permeate your area as much yet, but it will if Education Minnesota has their way. Are parents paying attention? Are they showing up? Or did that not really happen, or have they gone back to kind of the normal status quo? Oh, everything's fine now. We don't have to pay any attention.
Yeah, not so much where I'm at. And a lot of that was due to the fact that, in the area that I'm at, we got very lucky and we didn't have a lot of the strict policies that some of the metro schools did or some of the bigger schools did. So there wasn't quite as much to push back on, but there is always pushback. The sad part I would say about parental involvement in schools is, the kids that we need the most parental involvement for, those parents, they're never going to be
They're just not
involved.
going to pay attention no matter what.
They're not going to pay attention. And the only time they do pay attention is when, their son or daughter doesn't play basketball. Then they're going to go argue at a board meeting or something. You know what I mean? The things that really in the end don't really matter that much. So as far as parental involvement at school board meeting stuff around here, no. I mean, I can't tell you how many streams I watched, because sometimes I watch them just as entertainment, to watch some of the things that parents say and how board members react, because my history with school boards is probably as well documented as my history with Education Minnesota. So,
Yeah,
like to see me walk into
I'm not
boardrooms
real
for anything.
popular with several school boards in my area, so
Right.
I was called in for close air support in Owatonna and Albert Lee, and was able to catch some really interesting situations. Would you encourage, as a public school employee, would you encourage, even in small districts like yours, would you encourage parents to get out there and actually start showing up and start asking hard questions?
Absolutely. You have to. You have to. If you're going to continue to send your kids to school every day, right? And look, the majority of schools, especially small schools around here, and even the ones in the cities, most teachers are there. I mean, they do want to be there for the kids, right? It's just so many societal problems have started to bleed into the classrooms that we're losing control. But you as a parent, your child has got 13 years in a public school. You have got to involve yourself every
If you're
step of the
lucky,
way.
it's only 13.
Right. If you're lucky, it's only 13, and then that's something, remind me about that. We need to go back to that, because that has to do with teacher licensing and teacher prep. But, you have to involve yourself as a parent, because you need to know what is happening in your classroom, your kid's classroom, right? Because the absolute obsession with sending home homework, first of all, you got to be involved in that at some point. I hate homework, by the way. Anybody listening, I think it's one of the dumbest things we do as teachers, is send homework home. But anyway,
Here, hang out in this
you
building
have
for
to
8
involve
hours
yourself.
a day, and then also take home another 3 hours of work.
Right. So yes, homework.
That'd be like looking at
is
your boss
counterproductive.
yeah, it's 5 o'clock, you can go, but I expect you to do this, this, and this while you're at home, and make sure you bring it in and turn it in first thing in the morning.
Right.
There would be a
So
big old
yes, you
middle
have to
finger
involve
from me.
Right. You got to involve yourself. And when I say involve, I don't want you to just come in and yell at a teacher because your child isn't performing well. I want you to find out why. You know, I have my own kids, and I find myself sometimes erring on the side of my kids. But for the most part, I try to look at things kind of openly and say, okay, what could we be doing better? Is this a reason? Is my child not, and my kids are very lucky. They have two teachers, grandparents that are educators. So education is very important to us, and they get it supplemented here at home, and they get it supplemented all summer. So my kids are very good students. They're very
You mean your kids
respectful to
don't
their
get a break
teachers.
from learning?
Exactly.
Yeah.
We're constantly trying to teach, no matter what it is,
It's funny though, you said that you tend to take, and I don't know how old you are, but you tend to see, yeah, I'm on the side of my kid, which is far different when I was in school.
Mm-hmm.
Like if a teacher sent home a note with you to give to your parents, and they're like, you need to give this to your parents, you knew you were going to give that to your parents, because the teacher was going to say, I asked you to give this to your parents, and I asked them to sign it, and I haven't gotten it back, or it's not signed, and then it'd be a phone call to your parents.
Mm-hmm.
Or if the school called and said, hey, we need to talk to you about Junior or Missy's behavior, the parents, at that time would look at you, and it's a horrible scene from a movie, but you'll get it do you remember Terminator 2?
Okay.
when the liquid metal Terminator could take on the shape of whoever he wanted.
Yep.
And there was the scene where he's on the phone. He's posed as the foster mom, and she's talking on the phone, and then she puts her arm out, and then the cutaway is like her arms turned into a steel spear and has gone through the actual dad's
Right.
face. Like
Yep.
if you were at home and that phone call came from the school about you, that's how your mom handled you,
Right.
right?
You were in horror.
You
Right.
you, you were gonna get speared.
Right.
You like, what did you do now? What did you do wrong? You better hope that they keep you at school after school for the next 2 weeks, because when you come home, it's going to be worse, you know? And now it's like, how dare you tell Junior or Missy they can't say that?
And that's why I say, I do tend to err on the side of my kids too much, but I also go back to their kids.
Sure.
In the comments here, Wildlife Wanda, she said, once you do start to complain, they start to say you're the problem. And that's kind of where the issue we're at, why a lot of teachers don't want parental involvement, because especially younger teachers that are coming in, and I'm sorry to say this, but it's very true.
Don't be
They're not
sorry.
quite
It's
as
true.
right. They're kind of they're not quite as resilient as some teachers were that have been doing this for a while and are a little bit longer in the tooth. You
Which
know,
longer in the tooth.
I probably
There's
just
a
dated
phrase
myself
right
saying
out of the
that.
past. Nobody's gonna. What's that even mean?
Right.
Longer in the tooth. Teeth don't get longer. Is he a vampire guy? Um, but it goes back to what I was saying before I brought you in, which is we've gotten weak.
Right.
We've just gotten weak. We've built nothing but soft people, so you cannot criticize.
Right.
And
Personal responsibility
I'm
has
not going to go to
disappeared a
the
little bit.
normie con tropes of, everybody gets the participation medal. You know, I I couldn't care less about all that. We just in general, you cannot offer a critique.
Right.
You cannot, and that's a generation worth of that. And
Yeah.
my generation raised another generation. You know, you're really kind of the youngest generation right now of people who can't handle critique
Correct.
at all. They just cannot. You cannot say, "Hey, I don't know if that was really the best idea. Are you sure that's what you wanted to do?" And that is now permeated to, like you were saying, these young teachers coming in.
Right. And that
So,
kind of leads back to, I was sorry to interrupt you, but
no, go
I
ahead.
said that
It's your show now,
I wanted
anyways.
to. Oh, well, thanks. That's another part of the issue, I think, with the teacher licensure system. And I've talked about reforms in that, and my wife even agrees with me now that she's been doing this for, like I said, she's been in the classroom almost 20 years. When you look at educators,
She's a grizzled old war vet.
she is right. She is an immune system like Fort Knox. She doesn't even get sick anymore because she's been around kids for so long. But when you look at educators, the only thing they know is school, right? They go through 13 years in the public school system, then they go to college, and they go right back to work in the school system. So the only thing they've ever known
There's
is
no
the
life
public school
experience.
system. Right. So, I would say something to fix and maybe help with that resiliency is, and now this is probably radical, almost require teachers, you can go to college, you get your degree for teaching, but we're also going to require you to work in a different industry for a minimum of 2 years or something like that, so that we can learn that yes, teaching absolutely is difficult, and yes, it's
I think they
exhausting.
should all be janitors for like 3 years.
Something, or work in the trades or something like that,
Oh,
because
good God, no! I wouldn't want most of these people in the trades, man.
right, even if it's just shadowing an apprentice thing, you know what I mean, or something, because the big issue that it's almost like there's a disconnect between the rest of the world and some of my colleagues that I always hear the complaint of, oh, we have to buy our own supplies and our own things. We'd never ask a doctor to do that. Well, no, but talk to a mechanic and see how much money they got in their toolbox, and talk to a guy that works
And ask them who
construction
pays for all that in the toolbox.
exactly,
Every single
construction
mechanic.
crews. So
Every single mechanic will tell you, yeah, I work at such and such service center for such and such manufacturing certified garage, and they buy all of their own tools,
yeah,
and they
that Craftsman
leave
truck
them
pulls
there
up and they're
Monday.
paying for them.
They may leave them there when they leave on Friday night, but
Right,
those are their tools. When they leave that
right.
job, those tools go with them. They pay for all of that.
And trust me, I understand it. My wife and I spend, I don't even know how much money on our classrooms and our students and stuff like that. But we also got into this knowing that was going to be happening, and
Well,
we
there's
accepted that.
there's something else to be said about that though too, is that if the teachers are spending their own money on classroom supplies, a lot of that comes down to years ago, parents, I
Mhm.
mean, and you still see it, you know, Walmart and other places, other department stores will have, if your school district is this school district, then here is a recommended supply list
Right.
of, and there are people out there who, for better or worse, go, I can't afford this stuff.
Hmm.
I literally don't have it in my budget to buy these things.
Yep.
You know,
And
to
that's
quote
and
a
that's
to
that's
quote a popular song that some people are questioning the validity of the individual who wrote it and sings it, but to quote a popular song, um, I work overtime hours for bullshit pay, and the dollar ain't shit. And
right.
eh, that's how a lot of people feel, because we're taxed to no end. In Minnesota, they take taxes out of everything. Like,
Hmm.
I I live in a town of 2,700 people. They charge me for rain runoff, folks. They literally have assessed my utility bill for water runoff. And yet
Yep.
I'm supposed
It's
to, if I have a kid in the public school, which I don't. My kids are all graduated. Um, I'm supposed to now turn around also and like come up with out of pocket expenses of, you need to have this and this, and also be aware that your child may be called, and I've seen this, your child may be called upon to share their supplies with their neighbor.
right. And that's why teachers end up doing what we do, and we buy those extra classroom things to fill in the little gaps. And
So,
sometimes,
some kid whose parents can't afford it, or maybe they are neglectful, isn't feeling like a complete ass because
right,
they don't have something.
right, and we do it because it is tough for a kid to
Sure.
the kid sitting next to you has a box of 64 crayons and
And you
you
got 12.
don't have anything, right? So we get it, and
I
it's
ain't
no,
got the flesh colored one. Where
right.
Whose
It's not
flesh is it
something.
anyway?
It's not something that I don't think we should have to do it as teachers. Schools, trust me, we have the money. We're just so inefficiently run that it's. I'm sorry. Like we go back to what I said before, the increase in administrators has been insane, and you get rid of a little bit of that growth, you have
I
more money for the classroom. You look at you if you're listening right now, go find out what your school's general fund balance is,
Go
and if you
find
have a
out what
general.
the superintendent of your school district makes.
Absolutely, and find out how many days they're there. There are part-time soups that make over $150,000 a year, and they're only required to be there 3 days a week. So,
When I was working with the Albert Lee School District, I did some digging because their superintendent of schools basically put a demand in for a pay raise. And I compared the entire Albert Lee area school district, not just the city of Albert Lee, but the entire Albert Lee area school district. He was making almost 4 times the median household income of everybody in his school district.
and that's essentially the CEO of one of the largest employers probably in your town, and that
Yep.
CEO isn't producing the results that warrant that type of salary. I always tell people if you want to know where your school's priorities lie, right? Go walk into your school board chamber and look at the types of chairs that they sit in once a month compared to the chairs that your students
Oh,
and
that's
teachers go
freaking
sit in.
phenomenal, bro. Oh,
Right?
I've
That's
never thought
just
about it that way.
yep. And that'll tell you where the priorities lie. And a lot of times, honestly, I'll say this: I've listen. I'm not attacking administrators either because I have worked with some phenomenal ones. I've also worked with some bad ones. It comes from a place of, I'll just say it, it's ignorance from some school board members and some superintendents who may be phenomenal in one area of administration, but the other side of it here, the financial side, the business side, I'm sorry, look at what a superintendent is. These aren't people that have a business background. They're somebody that was a teacher for long enough to go back to school to get a principal's license. They were a principal long enough to go back to school to get a superintendent's license. So these are just educators moving up and taking on more responsibility, and that's why I think we see a lot of the issues we see is we don't have leadership that has a broad enough background to let's be honest, the way schools are set up, you're running a business. So we don't have people that have that kind of knowledge in those positions, and they make decisions that put us into bad spots.
I don't want to keep you for too much longer because I know you got
Mhm.
life. You got life, but I want to
It's
I want to
football
ask some.
practice tomorrow.
Yeah, I want to ask some kind of even though you're in a smaller district in southern Minnesota, I
Mhm.
know that you are starting to see some of the mission creep. That's that military terminology. Mission creep is you kind of lose sight of the mission,
Right.
and the mission kind of takes on a life of its own. Are you starting to see some of the mission creep come in through the influence of the more left-leaning organizations like Education Minnesota and the NEA and some of the senior ups and the teachers unions, where they're now starting to really push things like woke terminology and gender inclusive, the kind of the alphabet mafia mentality? Um, are you you know are you seeing talks about equity over what's right? Where is it starting to creep in? Is it making kind of testing the waters, if you will, of
Yeah,
even small school districts? And
it
are the
unfortunately
teachers
is.
aware of it?
Some teachers are aware of it, and some teachers are adamantly against it. I think that if you were to move out into the smaller schools, you're going to find more teachers that think the way that I do. But you still have that mix of teachers that are very left leaning, and they think that this is the new way to educate kids, and we should focus more on the social emotional than we should, just the hard education of it. And you're starting to see, some of it is forced to the point where even if they were against it, they don't have a choice. Every school in Minnesota a few years ago was required to put in a gender neutral bathroom, which, okay, most schools were smart about it. They made it a one stall bathroom and put a lock on it so that you're not having, a boy walk into a bathroom while a girl is using it, no matter how they identify. So they did it that way, but they didn't have a choice. Even if they didn't want to see those things creep into their schools. They were forced to by law. So
So
I think we're going to get to the point that we don't have a choice. It's
so
going to
let
get
me
forced down our throats no matter what.
let me ask this, because
Mhm.
did your school have a celebration of Pride Month?
No, nope,
Really?
nope, we did not.
Wow. Was there any community pushback or any complaint
Nope,
that you're aware of?
nope. Honestly, the only
Oh,
pushback
you
we
must
had
be
was
in a
when
small school district.
and that's absolutely right. I am right now. I a previous district,
Well, you
they
were until
absolutely
this
did.
show. So,
Don't worry, this might be my last year in the classroom anyway. So
um,
yeah.
what about celebrations like obviously school's not open during Juneteenth,
Mhm.
but what about like celebrations of like Black History Month? And
Yeah,
there again, folks, I want people to understand that's not a question of there shouldn't be a teaching of Black history. I think Black history is American history, and white history is American history. I don't even know if there is such a thing as actual Black history or white history. There's American history, and there's goods and bads in it. But we do see in most school districts, in like during the early parts of June with Pride Month, or even in some school districts they celebrate it a month early so that they
Mhm.
can say they celebrated it.
Right.
But Black History Month falls in the middle, not in the middle, but falls squarely in the school year, and you do see a
Mhm.
lot of focus on things like talking about white supremacy. You see a lot of talk about reparations. Has that permeated your school district yet?
Not to that amount. No, you'll see a lot of teachers that'll shift focus, and they're not even shift focus, but they'll make it a point to
A little bit
include
more
more.
unit studies on it.
Right. More maybe, okay, we're going to take a moment, and I'm going to, a lot of elementary teachers will take a chance and say, okay, I'm going to take this literacy unit. We're going to focus. So we're going to read this book about Martin Luther King Jr. or something like that. And they'll focus it on a prominent Black figure from history. But it hasn't gotten into the reparations talk and things like that. We haven't seen that. I haven't seen that yet in my schools.
Do you foresee government school districts, small school districts like yours being able to withstand that? Because, there is a big push to require it in the curricula
Mhm.
of
That's
all
going to be the
schools in Minnesota. And what is a small school district going to be able to do to withstand that? Because I don't see that they have outright.
No,
They just don't have any power to
no, we're
stand it.
bound by, and for anybody listening that's not familiar with education, we're bound by standards set by the state of Minnesota. We have to teach to standards and benchmarks for our kids to reach. And right now you're starting to see curriculum companies shift that more towards a little bit of the, and I hate to use this because it's such a subjective term, a little bit more of the woke ideology directly into the curriculums. So when schools go out and purchase curriculums, they're not going to have a choice. A teacher can make a personal decision to skip over a portion or, expand on something that may be in one of the, in the curriculum. But, for the most part, it's getting to the point where we almost don't have much of a choice, I think, where it's going to be forced upon us through, the legislature is going to force it on us, and curriculum companies right now, that's where the money is, and curriculum companies are in it for the money. I'm sorry, they ain't in it for the kids. Because again, that's something Wildlife Wanda here posted. She said they don't teach history correctly, and that is absolutely true. We do not teach history correctly. So, but we're kind of at the mercy of state standards and the curriculums that are available to us, unless a teacher wants to take it on themselves to create their entire curriculum themselves, which many do, but then they are bound by state standards. So it's coming no matter what.
Do you think teachers like you are going to be short for the education world as far as working in the public schools, the government schools, once that
Yep.
does come down the line? Will
Yeah.
it either be comply or get out?
Yep. I think that's where we're headed to, and it'll be just like everything else. It'll be slow and it'll work its way out from, the metro out. But I think that's coming, and that's why I say I'm approaching. I don't think the classroom is the place for him anymore. I'm thinking about other ways that I can still stay connected to education, but maybe not in the classroom. So I
Side
think that's
hustle.
coming down the pipeline. Yeah, consulting. I want to help. My big thing, I'd like to get into consulting and helping families with students on IEPs, because that's another area that is, special education might be the most underserved area in education. And that's any SPED teachers that are listening, that is not on you. You are the absolute superheroes of the school system. You've just been put into a system that is designed for you to fail. So if you're a SPED teacher and you listen to this, you're Superman to me. So it's just the system is set up to fail you. And so that's something I'd like to be able to find a way to help families that are struggling through that process.
I think all of these disgruntled teachers in an area should get together and start their own magnet school.
Yeah. I mean, it would be an opportunity for, again, parents, if you
and
want
literally start it right across the street.
Right. Well, that's something that schools are really smart about. Public schools, when they close a building, it's in every contract when they sell it. It can't be turned into a school of any type, pretty much. So, they're good about keeping the competition away, because, they're not stupid. They know if there's a better choice that opens up, and they're going to lose kids to it. And that's why school choice scares people so much, and that's why homeschooling scares people.
Well, homeschooling scares people because those homeschool kids are just weird.
That's right. I forgot that part.
Yeah, they're just weird. You know what you don't hear a lot about in homeschool though?
What's that?
School shootings. They just don't make the news.
That's very true.
Not enough
victims. True. That's another one. We could talk about that for hours and hours and hours. The whole school shooting crazy. Yeah.
That'd be a different show.
Yeah, that would be a completely different show.
Biggest pet peeve in your perspective right now in Minnesota education, and then maybe even nationally, besides Randy White?
Narcissism. It's like I said before, it is very, very
like clinical narcissism,
teachers.
or just narcissist people just generally being narcissistic.
Just generally being narcissistic. It's people do not want to see what they're doing isn't working, so they're going to fight that to the end. So that's why when we
that could actually be some clinical narcissism. Then.
Yeah, I suppose it could. Right? Yeah. When we talk about the changes that we really need to enact in our schools, it's going to be difficult to do, because you have to get people to change what they were taught. You have to get them to change what some of them in some cases have been doing for 20 or 30 years.
Any teachers in your school district show up with weird hair colors yet?
Nope, nope, nope.
Okay.
None yet, and not in my school. Not in
Have
my
you
school.
shown up with weird hair color yet?
I don't have any hair, so that would be pretty amazing if I could figure out a way to color my hair.
Dye your scalp pink.
Right. No, I don't. That hasn't creeped its way down here yet. Do have it with, the kids do, but kids have always been expressive, and different color hair is just a different way for them to express now. So
Tente tattoos on your skull there, Teach. That's
well, I could do that maybe. Just got to find the right design.
do you have any hope in reforming public education in Minnesota, or do you think it's going to have to crumble in on itself and
It
then
has
maybe
to
be?
collapse.
Oh, well, you just didn't even wait for me to finish that question. So it's
Yeah,
has to collapse.
yeah,
Okay.
it has to. When we talk about it, yeah, the only way, in my opinion, and again, I don't know if I'm right, but I'm basing myself off of school systems that have proven to work, in other countries. And there's anybody that's listening, pick up a few books. There's a guy named John Taylor Gatto who wrote books back in he wrote one back in the '90s, and he just wrote another one before he passed. We need to relook at how we do school. The school day can't be it can't be what it is right now. That's not how kids learn. That's not how they grow, especially in the elementary grades. And as we get closer to entering, the real world, we're doing a disservice right now by the way that we operate our schools. So, but to fix that, you have an almost total collapse of the system because there's too much change necessary, and there's too much money in it for some people right now to change the way we're doing it, unfortunately.
When you when you look at a collapsing system, do you think there can be a positive like phoenix rising out of it, or do you think it could mean the end of public education the way we've known it for the last 120 years in Minnesota?
I think public education is necessary right now. It is in the type of society that we have. Education, the public school system it's necessary, but so is the private school system, and so is a few different pathways. So there is a way that we can come out of this, and the public school system can flourish and prove to be productive for society. And but again, like I said, it's going to take a complete change of thought on how we currently do things, and we're going to have to get rid of some stigmas we put on in things in education, and discipline has to become a major factor again. And again, the focus on literacy, but we need some
School
help from
uniforms.
society. Right. School uniforms will fix everything, right along with the free lunches and free breakfasts. But we need society to help us, instill values in kids that make it possible to educate them. And the ones that aren't willing to do that, we need to find ways as schools to say, okay, get out. I hate saying that but you can only give kids so many chances until they're affecting the education of the other kids in the classroom to where we can't do this anymore. Right? If you're not going to be here to at least attempt to learn, we have to find a different way for you. We have to find something else for you so that these kids that do want to further their education, they can at least do it in peace and not a disrupted classroom. So, like I said, there's a lot of things we need to solve, but again, it would take a massive effort from both education and from society to do it. It really would.
I've got a friend of mine that hosts a pretty big show. It's called Disaffected, and he tends to he covers a lot of topics, but a lot of them stem around the kind of the rise of cluster B personality disorders within certain segments of the population. And you brought up narcissism, and the idea, kind of this doubling down of I couldn't possibly be wrong.
Right.
And I think you would make a great guest for my friend Josh on Disaffected to talk a little bit just from the perspective of that personality, that cluster B personality perspective as a teacher, not necessarily in your own school district, but seeing the narcissism and the borderline personality disorder types as they move and operate within education. Because I see them a lot in the education system. I see borderline personality disorder in a lot of people in the education system. I see narcissistic personality disorder in a lot of people in the education system. I'd like to connect you with him if you'd be okay with that.
Yeah, absolutely.
Obviously you're probably not going to be able to get on with him before school year starts, but I really think it
Right.
would be a very interesting conversation for you guys to at least explore, sitting down and talking about the kind of influence that has had on education in places like Minnesota and even across the U.S. It's a, I think it's very, I think there's a lot more influence of that in education by people who are educating educators and by people who are educating students now,
Yep.
and
Absolutely.
passing a lot of that on to their classes, to their, especially to malleable, moldable young minds that maybe already are bent that way.
Right. No, no, I'd absolutely be happy to connect with him and have a discussion for sure.
But yeah, we'll message me off of here, and we'll get an
Okay.
email.
Yep.
We'll get an email going. Um, Closing thoughts, since you've already said it's going to take a total collapse and then a rebuild. Just some parting thoughts about your biggest concern for small school districts as the state gets ready to push these requirements onto them. Are they going to? Is it going to take school boards being, for lack of better terminology, kind of being overturned and having solid, very traditionally minded parents running for school board, or at least at the very least supporting the solid school board members and telling them, no, we're going to back your play, you're going to say no to this no matter what, or we're going to replace you? Do you think that'll help?
Yeah, what we need is you need school boards that honestly are willing to go to war and say to the Department of Education, no, we're not going to do this. The first step would be to just completely dismantle the Department of Education and go back to local controls for schools. Each area, your local schools know your area. They know what the kids need. They know the workforce that they're looking for, and you know, so local control needs to go back. But it's going to take people that are willing to fight and willing to be attacked and um, willing to once again tear down a system that is um, cost trillions and trillions of taxpayer dollars, and we haven't seen return for it. So it's going to take fighters. It really, really is, because it will get ugly. Because Education Minnesota has proven, you attack their, you attack their bank account, they're going to come after you in more ways than just disavowing what you're saying. They they do not like when you buck the system, and the Department of Ed doesn't either. And it's where we're at right now with government intervention and just about everything. But unfortunately, schools are, yeah, we need fighters. We need a revolution in the public school system is the best way I guess I can say it.
Okay. 3 quick hot takes and then we'll kick you out of here.
Okay.
Hot take number 1, abolish the State Department of Education. Yes or no?
Absolutely. Immediately.
Okay. Hot take number 2, change the funding structure so that school boards don't have nearly as much taxation power as they have now. Yes or no?
Absolutely. Absolutely.
And the reason I ask that is just so people know your school board has the highest power, or the most power, when it comes to taxing you of anyone.
Yep.
They literally can pass a referendum without your permission if need be. So,
Yep.
And there are school superintendents out there who are advocating for the ability to have referendums with our school funding increases without referendums if school districts are large enough, which is why you're starting to see a big push for consolidation.
Yep.
So we've got to absolutely defund or abolish the Minnesota Department of Education, eliminate, if we will, the power of taxation as much as possible from school boards locally. Here's the last one: Federal Department of Education, abolish it. Yes or no?
Bye.
No, he didn't even wait. He did. He's like, oh gosh, yeah. Well, let me know if you're looking for a job before the end of the day tomorrow. So if somebody figure out who this is.
Right.
The reason I ask that is because a lot of people have no idea that the Department of Education at the federal level, especially, is actually a relatively new beast.
Mm-hmm.
It didn't come in until 1980,
Yep.
and it has done absolutely nothing but, I think, accelerate the degradation of education in the United States. So,
right, when they just throw unfunded mandate after unfunded mandate at schools, again,
absolutely.
It goes back to that, how our schools are run and where the money is spent. So, yep.
Well,
get rid of them.
Yeah. Hey, you're right. We're on the same page. You said, I think we'll have a lot to talk about that we might agree on. And, so far you did all right.
Yeah, good.
That's a
Good. I
good.
didn't swear either. That was the biggest thing my wife was afraid of. I was going to just drop too many F-bombs. The football coach knew would come out.
Oh, it's happened on my show before. So I will not say whether it was me or not, but it has happened on my show on occasion. Well, hey, get out of here. Go get some rest before you got to get up for. I suppose you guys are on 2-a-days.
No, done with 2-a-days. We're on game week. So
Oh,
no
game week.
2-a-days. Yep. Gotta get ready
So
to go.
not
We're back in
preseason.
service
So
too. So no,
no,
not preseason. We had our
no preseason.
scrimmages on Saturday, and so it's game week.
Well, yeah. Like you do, like the Minnesota Vikings do. Win all your preseason games so you can lose everything in the regular season.
Right. No, hopefully we do. Yeah. No,
I
hopefully
went
we're
there.
going to
I
follow
don't
the
know
path of the
anything
Vikings.
about. I don't know anything about football or.
Oh
sports.
yeah, no, the Vikings usually lose all of their preseason. I don't think they've won a preseason game for like 4 years or something like that. So.
Oh, when I was still watching them, they'd always win in preseason.
Ah.
And then unless they were Denny Green, it was like what was it, 16-1 that one year or whatever it was, and
yeah. Yep, no, that trend is reversed for Vikings fans. So we
Oh,
don't look too much into the preseason.
oh well, good. Well, thanks a lot for the time, and I'll close up without you, and I'll try and connect you with Josh. We'll get an email exchange or something going.
That's perfect. I appreciate it. One last thing I'll say before anybody that's listening, again, I'm not attacking teachers. I'm not attacking people. I am attacking a system. So please understand that when you see my posts. I understand the struggles teachers are facing. I understand the struggles students are facing. I understand the struggles parents are facing. And if there's one thing you will take from me is please hope and understand that I just want to see a better world. And we get a better world by doing better for our kids. And we're obviously not doing that. So if we can all figure out a way to come together on that one little topic, we're going to see some massive change, right? So hopefully people take that. I am not attacking teachers.
I'm going to have to make fun. It's for the children.
It's for the children, right? What about the children?
What about the children? Oh,
right.
Yeah. Well, I really appreciate your time. I look forward to seeing more of your stuff, and we'll get you connected if we can with Josh, and
Awesome.
you'll have to keep me abreast with things as they come down the pike from these different education organizations that you're so tight with.
Right, absolutely. I'll let you know when my friends tell me the inside secrets.
There you go. Thanks a lot, man. Have a good night.
Thank you. You too.
Ladies and gentlemen, I actually think this was a very good conversation because it was just down to earth. He didn't come in here with any deep dark secrets about, oh, by the way, just so you know, they're drinking adrenochrome in the schools. I knew that wasn't going to be the case, but here's a guy on the inside saying, here's the things that need to change, and being willing to say the thing that I know a lot of like traditional, maybe more conservative minded teachers are saying the system's going to have to collapse. I just got a message from a friend that's a teacher. Yeah, I agree. Collapse. It's just getting there. Because there's two diametrically opposed perspectives in education. And both sides say they're interested in what's best for the children. It's for the children. The problem is that one side is telling you what this is for the children. We want what's best for the children, but we're going to tell you what's best for the children based on our own personal subjective standards. And the other side, they're saying what's best for the children is an objective standard of education. And those two are diametrically opposed, and they cannot both be right. You can't have diametrically opposed views and both be right. You just can't. It's really important for people to understand that there is very little room for fence sitting in government education, state-sponsored indoctrination, whatever you want to call it. There's no room for fence sitting. We have to get back to what they, used to call reading, writing, and arithmetic. And there's not a lot of focus on that anymore. And as you heard Teach say, the state is going to start mandating things that have absolutely nothing to do with reading, writing, and arithmetic for even very rural schools. I got Wildlife Wanda and some other friends from the Mankato area that are watching. Mankato is not a metropolis by any stretch of the imagination, and I attended a school board meeting there, at the behest of some of the teachers, especially when it came to some of the, the jab mandates and mask mandates and, some of the things that were being done to the school teachers. I attended a meeting with them and said, hey, yeah, you guys are going to have to stand on, shoulder to shoulder, toe to toe against the administration. And I saw the turnout in that not tiny, but in Mankato of all places. I saw it in Owatonna. I saw it in Albert Lee. I saw it in the Dover Yoda School District in, outside of Rochester. Tiny little school district. I've seen it. I've seen diversity, inclusion, and equity. DI, not DEI. I like to use the DI, structure. I saw, critical race theory rear its head in a place like Owatonna. We're not talking about a metro area. I saw the heavy-handedness and tyranny of the Rochester Public Schools when they were trespassing people for showing up without wearing masks. And they're not doing that because they're worried about the children. They're doing that to keep involvement out of the school district so that people who maybe don't share their values, but do have a shared set of values with people around them, keeping them away from being able to hold them accountable. They'll use whatever they need to do to shut you down. They'll label you, a stochastic terrorist, a homegrown terrorist. They'll label you a lone wolf for your words. They'll see that you get charged and arrested. And there are people in this country who were charged and arrested, accused of crimes for speaking at school board meetings. That stuff that's got to wake you up. And so while you have the time, while you still have the ability, you need to get to your school board meetings. You need to let them know you're watching. You need to let them know that if they're not doing the right things, you're going to get rid of, through voting, that you're going to get rid of them and you're going to put people on the school board that are going to represent the community and not the special interests of the school unions, the NEA and Education Minnesota or Education Iowa or Education Wisconsin or whatever the case might be. It's very important that people be aware of how to handle this going forward. Incredibly important. Folks, one more time, if you haven't subscribed to the channel yet, please do. Every subscriber counts. It helps me in the algorithm. Like the video, share the video with your friends. I'm going to try and put some shorts out from my conversation with Teach. I really want people to hear what he had to say because it's down to earth. And it's the reality of what a lot of people who are teachers just like him that have the same mentality who don't have a voice and haven't thought about or found a way to do it to where they can have a voice without also jeopardizing a career that they love. And trust me, I understand what it means to jeopardize a career that you love. Because I lost my career that I loved and I was good at for speaking out during 2020 and 2021. So I get why it's so hard. But as many of you know, we're getting to that point with the agenda where you just may have to be willing to make that sacrifice, as hard as it might be. So subscribe to the channel, share the video with as many of your friends who are big advocates of the government school system, and with as many of your teacher friends as possible. I welcome the feedback. Come back and even make a little comment on the video after it processes from the live stream. That helps me in the algorithm as well. And like I said, if somebody has something they want to, debate via comment, tell them to come, be respectful, talk to me about it. I love that kind of feedback. I thrive on it, really, because I want to get outside of my echo chamber, and you and your friends should want to get outside of the echo chamber as well. Wildlife Wanda, thank you for being a longtime watcher or viewer or listener or whatever you want to call it, and sticking around in the chat. For those of you that made it all the way through to this point, thank you so much. Go over and check out my Subscribestar, Minnesota Black Rope Regiment podcast on Subscribestar. Support me at the entry level. Every little bit helps. So, my friends, until next time, as my friend Monica put my closing line in this hand-painted acrylic sign: fight for your liberty, it is yours. Fight for your freedom, it belongs to you. And sic semper tyrannis.
We are going for liftoff in T-30.
Stand by for further instructions, Minnesota Black Rope Regiment.
Secondary guidance systems engaged.
Minnesota Black Rope Regiment, it will be on my mark.
All systems are a go. All systems are a go.
Minnesota Black Rope Regiment, you are over the target. You are authorized to fire at